Imagine a single question, just one, getting you banned for life from the most powerful building on Earth. Inside the Pentagon, a quiet rule change almost silenced the very people tasked with telling you the truth about war, national security, and where your tax dollars go. If this had stayed hidden, you might never have known the real story behind the next global conflict. For years, reporters walked into the Pentagon as the eyes and ears of the public. But recently, the rules of engagement shifted. Journalists were forced into a trap, agree to new restrictive conditions that could punish them for doing their jobs or lose their access entirely. This isn't a hypothetical what if, it actually happened, and it took a federal judge to step in and declare that a constitutional line had been crossed. This matters right now because it's about a right that most people don't notice until it's already gone. Your right to know what the government is doing in your name. By the end of this, you'll see exactly how the Pentagon tried to filter reality, why a judge saw it as a direct threat to the First Amendment, and the chilling message it sends about the balance of power in America today. The situation centered on a new policy that turned suggestions into mandatory conditions. To keep their press passes, journalists had to sign on to rules that many warned would fundamentally break how they gather information. The most dangerous part was a clause suggesting that any journalist who solicits sensitive information from a source could be labelled a security risk and effectively blacklisted. Think about that. Journalism, at its core, is the act of asking for information. Sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes inconvenient, but necessary. When the act of asking a question becomes grounds for punishment, the truth itself becomes the risk. The escalation was immediate and unusually unified. Major news organizations across the political spectrum, from CNN and the New York Times to Fox News, refused to sign. They chose to step back from daily Pentagon coverage rather than operate under rules they believed compromised their independence. That created a vacuum. And when that space is filled only by outlets willing to comply, it quietly reshapes what the public sees and hears. So ask yourself, if access depends on agreement, how much of what reaches you is filtered before it even becomes news? That question is what pushed this into the courts. A lawsuit challenged the policy as a violation of free speech and basic constitutional protections. And the judge didn't just push back, he dismantled the logic behind the policy. He found that the rules were so vague that journalists wouldn't know what crossed the line, which means many would simply stop asking difficult questions altogether. That's what's known as a chilling effect. You don't have to censor speech directly if fear does the job for you. Even more concerning was the issue of viewpoint discrimination. The court pointed to signs that officials were more hostile toward critical reporting while being more open to coverage that aligned with their messaging. And that's where this stops being a technical legal fight and becomes something much deeper. Because if access to power depends on being favorable, then scrutiny disappears. And without scrutiny, accountability fades with it. At the same time, the Pentagon argues this was about national security, protecting sensitive information, preventing leaks, safeguarding lives. Those are real responsibilities and they matter. But history complicates that argument. There have been moments, Vietnam, Iraq, where tight control over information didn't just protect security, it shaped public perception in ways that later proved incomplete or misleading. That's why the judge emphasized something critical. In times of conflict, transparency isn't a luxury, it's a safeguard. One moment from the courtroom captures everything. Government lawyers were asked to clearly define what soliciting information actually meant, and they struggled. If the rule isn't clear to the people enforcing it, how can journalists follow it without risking their careers? That uncertainty becomes its own kind of pressure, a quiet signal to stay within invisible boundaries. The ruling blocks the most restrictive parts of the policy and restores access for affected journalists. But it doesn't end the story. The Pentagon is appealing, which means the deeper conflict between security and transparency, between control and accountability, is still unfolding. And maybe the bigger question isn't just about this case, it's about what comes next. If one institution can reshape access in a way that pressures journalists to hold back, what stops that logic from spreading? What does that mean for how the next major conflict is reported? For what information reaches you? For how decisions made in your name are understood? Or misunderstood? Because once you start seeing how easily the flow of information can be narrowed without ever being fully shut off, it becomes harder to ignore the possibility that other lines are being tested in ways we don't immediately see, just beneath the surface of the stories we think we already understand.